David always thought he was just like everyone else. He worked at a small design company, lived in a tiny apartment with a broken air conditioner, and spent most evenings watching old movies on his laptop. But there was something about David that made him feel different from other people, something that made him feel ashamed and alone. Ever since he was a teenager, David's mind would create thoughts he didn't want. Not dangerous thoughts or mean thoughts about hurting anyone, just weird, random ideas that would pop into his head at the worst times, like when he was talking to his boss. His brain might suddenly think about purple elephants dancing, or when he was at the grocery store. He'd imagine what would happen if all the cereal boxes suddenly came to life. These thoughts made no sense. They weren't his real thoughts. They just appeared in his mind like uninvited guests at a party. David tried everything to make them stop. He went to doctors who gave him pills that made him sleepy. He tried meditation apps that told him to breathe deeply and think of peaceful forests. He even bought expensive books about controlling your mind. Nothing worked. The thoughts kept coming, and David kept feeling worse about himself. He started avoiding people because he was afraid they might somehow know what was going on in his head. He stopped going to work parties and family dinners. He felt like he was living behind a glass wall, watching normal people live normal lives, while he struggled with his strange, unwanted thoughts. On a Tuesday evening in March, the power went out in David's neighborhood. The whole street went dark except for the soft glow of candles and phone flashlights in windows. David had been working late on his laptop when everything suddenly shut off. His apartment became completely black. He grabbed his phone's flashlight and decided to walk to the coffee shop down the street. Maybe they had power, or at least some candles where he could sit and wait for the electricity to come back. The streets were unusually quiet. People were walking slowly, using their phones to light the way, talking in hushed voices like they were in a library. The coffee shop was open, lit by dozens of small candles placed on every table. It looked magical, like something from an old fairy tale. The barista was serving drinks by candlelight, and soft acoustic music played from a battery-powered speaker. David ordered a hot chocolate and looked around for a place to sit. That's when he saw her. A woman was sitting alone at a corner table, reading a thick book by the light of 3 candles. She had curly hair that caught the candlelight and wore a simple sweater that looked hand-wear-upon. But there was something else about her, something that made David stop and stare. She seemed to be glowing, not like a light bulb or a flashlight, more like the way the moon glows on a clear night, or how fireflies look in summer grass. It was soft and warm, like gold and honey mixed with starlight. David blinked hard, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the candlelight was creating an optical illusion. But the glow was still there. David found a table across the room where he could watch without being obvious. He sipped his hot chocolate and tried to understand what he was seeing. The woman kept reading, completely unaware that she looked like she was lit from within. Other people walked past her table, ordered drinks, chatted with friends. Nobody else seemed to notice anything unusual. Then something happened that changed everything. David's mind created one of its random, unwanted thoughts. This time it was about what would happen if all the coffee cups in the shop suddenly turned into tiny boats and sailed away. It was silly and meaningless, the kind of thought that usually made David feel embarrassed and frustrated. But the moment the thought appeared in his head, the woman's glow got brighter. David's heart started beating faster. He stared at the woman, waiting to see if it would happen again. Sure enough, when another random thought popped into his mind about the candles turning into dancing butterflies, her glow intensified even more. She looked like she was sitting inside a bubble of warm, golden light. The woman closed her book and smiled at something, though David couldn't tell what. She looked happy and peaceful, like someone who had just received wonderful news. The glow round her pulsed gently, like a heartbeat made of light. David felt confused and scared. For years, he had hated the strange thoughts that invaded his mind. They made him feel broken and weird. But now, somehow, those same thoughts seemed to be creating something beautiful. The woman looked radiant, literally glowing with an inner light that grew stronger every time his mind wandered into its usual strange territory. He sat there for an hour, testing his theory. Every time an unwanted thought entered his head, the woman's glow would respond. When he tried to focus on normal things like his work or what he needed to buy at the store, tomorrow, her light would dim slightly. But when his mind drifted into its familiar pattern of random, meaningless ideas, she would shine brighter than the candles on her table. David had never seen anything like it. He had never heard of anything like it. He started to wonder if he was losing his mind completely. Maybe the stress of dealing with his unwanted thoughts for so many years had finally made him start hallucinating. Maybe he needed to go to the hospital. But the woman looked so peaceful, so genuinely happy. Whatever was happening, it didn't seem to be hurting her. If anything, she looked more alive and vibrant than anyone else in the coffee shop. When the power suddenly came back on and the regular lights flickered to life, the woman packed up her book and left. David watched her walk out into the bright street, still glowing softly in the electric light. She moved with a lightness in her step, like someone who felt truly good about life. David sat alone at his table long after she was gone, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed for the first time in years. His unwanted thoughts didn't make him feel ashamed. Instead, they had created something magical and beautiful. He didn't understand how or why, but somehow his mind's strange wanderings had made another person shine with inner light. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the glowing woman and what it might mean. Maybe his unwanted thoughts weren't a curse after all. Maybe they were something else entirely. Something he had never considered before. Maybe there was a reason his mind worked the way it did for the first time in his adult life. David felt a tiny spark of hope about his mental struggles. He didn't have answers yet, but he had seen something impossible and beautiful, and that was enough to make him want to learn more. David couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen for 3 days straight. He found himself distracted at work, staring out the window and wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. His coworkers asked if he was feeling okay because he kept zoning out during meetings and forgetting to finish his design projects. Every evening after work, David walked past the coffee shop, hoping to see the glowing woman again. He felt a little silly, like a detective following clues in a mystery novel. But he had to know if what he saw was real, or if his mind was finally playing the cruelest trick of all. On Friday evening, just as David was about to give up and go home, he saw her through the coffee shop window. She was sitting at the same corner table, but this time she had a camera with a big lens next to her laptop. David's heart started racing. This was his chance to figure out what was really happening. He ordered his usual hot chocolate and found a table where he could see her clearly. In the bright electric lights of the coffee shop, she looked completely normal, pretty, with kind eyes and a gentle smile, but definitely not glowing. David started to feel disappointed. Maybe it really had been his imagination after all. Then his mind did what it always did, without warning. A random thought popped into his head about what would happen if all the coffee shop chairs suddenly grew wings and flew round the room like wooden birds. David usually hated when this happened, but this time he watched the woman carefully. There it was again. A soft, warm glow began to surround her, like she was sitting in a pool of golden sunlight. It was subtle in the bright lights, but definitely. Then David's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't crazy. This was really happening. The woman looked up from her laptop and glanced around the coffee shop. For a moment, her eyes met David's, and she smiled politely. David quickly looked down at his phone, pretending to read something important. When he looked up again, she was packing up her things. David panicked. He couldn't let her leave without talking to her. He had so many questions, and she was the only person who might have answers. Before he could lose his nerve, he stood up and walked over to her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I noticed you're a photographer. I work in graphic design, and I was wondering what kind of camera you use." The woman looked up with genuine interest. "Oh, how cool. I'm Riley. I mostly do nature photography. but I'm trying to branch out into portraits." She held up her camera. "This is a Canon, nothing too fancy, but it gets the job done." "On David." He replied, feeling more confident. "Mind if I sit down?" "For a minute. I don't meet many other creative people around here." Riley gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Please. I love the company. I spend way too much time talking to myself when I'm editing photos." As they talked, David learned that Riley had moved to town 6 months ago to be closer to nature for her photography work. She loved capturing sunrise shots in the nearby mountains and had been trying to build up a portfolio to sell her work. Online, she was funny and easy to talk to, with a laugh that made David feel relaxed for the first time in weeks. But the most amazing thing was watching her glow get brighter, as his unwanted thoughts continued to pop up when his mind randomly. Imagine what would happen if the coffee shop's music turned into a choir of singing spoons. Riley's whole face seemed to light up from within when he thought about the sugar packets transforming into tiny white envelopes, carrying messages from fairies. The golden glow round her shoulders intensified. The strangest part was that Riley seemed to become more animated and happy as the glow got brighter. She started talking more enthusiastically about her photography projects, sharing stories about funny things that had happened during photo shoots, and making jokes that had both of them laughing. It was like David's weird thoughts were somehow feeding her energy and joy. David started paying attention to the pattern more carefully. Every time his mind wandered into its usual strange territory, Riley would perk up. Her eyes would get brighter, her smile would get wider, and she would lean forward with more interest in their conversation. But when David tried hard to focus on normal topics and keep his thoughts controlled, she would seem to deflate slightly, becoming quieter and less engaged. This discovery both thrilled and terrified David. On one hand, his unwanted thoughts were creating something beautiful and positive for another person. On the other hand, he had no idea how this was possible or what it meant for either of them. After an hour of conversation, Riley suggested they exchange phone numbers. "It would be great to have a creative friend in town," she said. "Maybe we could collaborate on something sometime. You could help with design work for my photography website." David agreed immediately. As they said goodbye and Riley gathered her camera equipment, David noticed something that made his heart sink a little. Without his random thoughts actively firing, her glow was fading. She still looked happy from their conversation, but the magical inner light was dimming like a candle running out of wax. Walking home that night, David felt more confused than ever. He had made a genuine connection with someone kind and interesting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Riley's happiness somehow depended on his mental struggles. What kind of relationship was that? Was it healthy? Was it fair to either of them? Over the weekend, David found himself thinking about Riley constantly, not just because of the glowing mystery, but because she was the first person in years who had made him feel normal and accepted. When his unwanted thoughts popped up during their conversation, he hadn't felt ashamed or broken. Instead, he had watched them create light and joy in another person. For the first time since the strange thoughts had started years ago, David began to wonder if there might be a purpose to his mental struggles. Maybe his mind worked differently for a reason. Maybe what he had always seen as a curse was actually something else entirely. David decided he needed to spend more time with Riley, not just to understand the glowing phenomenon, but because talking to her made him feel like a complete person, instead of someone defined by his mental health struggles. He texted her on Sunday evening, asking if she wanted to meet for coffee again the next week. Her response came back within minutes. "I'd love to. Talking with you yesterday was the highlight of my week. I felt so energized and inspired." Afterward, David stared at his phone screen, Riley's words confirming what he had suspected. Somehow, his unwanted thoughts were giving her exactly what she needed, just as her presence was giving him something he had been searching for his entire adult life: acceptance and understanding. Over the next 3 weeks, David and Riley met for coffee almost every other day. What had started as David's curiosity about the glowing mystery had grown into a genuine friendship. Riley was unlike anyone he had ever met. She saw beauty in ordinary things, like the way shadows fell across brick walls or how raindrops created patterns on windows. Her enthusiasm for life was infectious, and David found himself looking forward to their conversations more than anything else in his week. But the glowing phenomenon continued to puzzle him every time they sat together. David would watch as his unwanted thoughts made Riley literally shine with inner light. She would become more animated, more creative, more full of life. Her eyes would sparkle when she talked about her photography projects, and she would laugh more easily at his jokes. It was like his mental struggles were somehow feeding her soul. David started keeping a small notebook where he would secretly record what happened during their meetings. When his mind randomly thought about staplers turning into tiny robots, Riley would suddenly get excited about a new photo idea. When he imagined what would happen if all the coffee cups started singing opera, she would pull out her camera and start taking pictures of the interesting light coming through the window. The pattern was undeniable, but David still had no idea what it meant or how it was possible. One rainy Thursday evening, Riley seemed different. She was quieter than usual, and even though David's thoughts were making her glow as brightly as ever, she kept staring out the window with a sad expression. Her usual cheerfulness felt forced, like she was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. "Are you okay?" David asked, setting down his coffee cup. "You seem a little off today." Riley was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the glass. "Can I tell you something?" she finally said. "Something I don't usually share with people?" David nodded, feeling honored that she trusted him enough to open up. "I've been struggling with depression for most of my adult life," Riley said softly. "Some days are better than others, but there are times when I feel like I'm drowning in my own thoughts. Dark thoughts that tell me I'm worthless, that nobody would miss me if I disappeared." David felt his heart clench. He had no idea that Riley was fighting such a difficult battle. She always seemed so bright and positive when they were together. "The weird thing is," Riley continued, "ever since we started hanging out, I've been feeling so much better. Not just happy, but actually hopeful about life. Like there's this warm energy inside me that keeps the darkness away. I know it sounds crazy, but talking with you makes me feel like I'm glowing from the inside out." David nearly choked on his coffee. Riley's words hit him like a lightning bolt. She could feel the glow, even if she couldn't see it the way he could. "That doesn't sound crazy at all," David said carefully. "Actually, I need to tell you something too. Something I've never told anyone." For the next hour, David shared his story. He told Riley about the unwanted thoughts that had plagued him since he was a teenager. He explained how they made him feel ashamed and broken, how he had tried everything to make them stop. He described the doctors and medications and meditation apps that had never worked. "I always thought these thoughts were a curse," David said. "They made me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me. But since meeting you, I've started to wonder if maybe they serve a purpose I never understood." Riley listened with growing amazement as David talked about his mental struggles. She began to piece together her own experiences. The timing of when she felt most energized and hopeful, the way her depression seemed to lift whenever they spent time together, the strange sensation of inner warmth that she had never been able to explain. "David," she said slowly, "I think your thoughts aren't random at all. I think they're connected to what I need emotionally. When you have those weird ideas pop into your head, it's like you're sending me some kind of positive energy." David stared at her. "You really feel it?" "I feel something," Riley said. "It's like someone turns on a light inside me when we're together. The dark thoughts that usually consume me just fade away, replaced by this incredible sense of peace and possibility." They sat in stunned silence for several minutes, both trying to process what this meant. David's unwanted thoughts, which had caused him years of suffering and shame, were somehow providing Riley with the emotional strength she needed to fight her depression. His mental struggles weren't meaningless after all. They were helping someone else survive their own battle. "This is impossible," David said. "Things like this don't happen in real life." "But it is happening," Riley replied. "I don't understand how or why, but I can't argue with the results. Before I met you, I was having some of the darkest thoughts I've ever experienced. I was seriously considering whether life was worth living anymore. But now I wake up excited about each day. I'm taking better photos, eating better food, calling my family more often. It's like you've given me back the part of myself I thought I had lost forever. David felt tears welling up in his eyes. For years, he had believed his mental struggles served no purpose except to make him miserable. He had seen himself as broken, defective, someone who would never be able to contribute anything meaningful to the world. But Riley was telling him that his pain had literally saved her life. "What does this mean for us?" David asked. "I mean, what kind of friendship is this? What kind of connection?" Riley reached across the table and took his hand. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've never heard of anything like this before. But I do know that you've given me hope when I had none. Your struggles have somehow become my strength. That feels like the most generous gift anyone has ever given me." That night, David went home with his mind spinning. Everything he thought he knew about himself and his mental health had been turned upside down. His unwanted thoughts weren't a burden to be cured. They were somehow essential to helping another person thrive. The shame he had carried for years began to transform into something else, purpose. For the first time in his adult life, David felt like his struggles meant something bigger than his own pain. He still didn't understand how it worked, but he couldn't deny the evidence. His broken mind was somehow healing Riley's broken heart, and her healing was giving his suffering meaning he had never imagined possible. David fell asleep that night feeling something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Genuine pride in who he was, strange thoughts, and awe. After their big conversation, David felt like he was living in a completely different world. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of his own mind. Instead of hiding from situations that might trigger his unwanted thoughts, he started seeking them out. If his strange mental patterns could help Riley fight her depression, then maybe he should embrace them instead of fighting them. David began what he privately called his experiment. He started going to crowded places that used to make him anxious, because he knew they would make his thoughts go wild. He visited busy shopping malls during weekend rush hours, sat in packed restaurants during lunchtime, and even attended local community events where he didn't know anyone. The results were immediate and dramatic. Every time David put himself in a stressful situation, his mind would start creating its usual parade of random ideas. He would imagine all the shoppers in the mall suddenly breaking into synchronized dance routines, or picture the restaurants, soup bowls growing tiny legs and walking around the tables. These thoughts used to embarrass him, but now he welcomed them because he knew what they meant for Riley. When they met for coffee after David's mall visits, Riley would practically glow like a small sun. Her eyes would be brighter, her smile wider, and she would talk excitedly about new photography projects she wanted to try. She told David about reconnecting with old friends she hadn't spoken to in months, about finally cleaning her apartment and organizing her photo equipment, about feeling motivated to submit her work to photography contests. "I don't know what you're doing differently," Riley said one evening, "but whatever it is, keep doing it. I feel more alive than I have in years. It's like someone replaced all the heavy gray clouds in my brain with sunshine." David felt proud and amazed. His mental struggles, which had once made him feel useless and broken, were now giving someone else the energy to live fully. But as the weeks went on, he started to notice something troubling. The constant stress of putting himself in overwhelming situations was exhausting him. David found himself sleeping poorly, losing his appetite, and feeling anxious all the time. At work, his boss commented that he seemed distracted and asked if everything was okay at home. David's friends started noticing that he looked tired and worried all the time. But every time David saw how happy and healthy Riley was becoming, he pushed his own discomfort aside. Her depression was lifting, her creativity was flowing, and she was making plans for her future. How could he complain about feeling tired when his efforts were literally saving her life? Then David decided to try something that scared him. What would happen if he used the mental techniques his old therapist had taught him? What if he tried to calm his mind and reduce the unwanted thoughts? He had always wanted to know if those coping strategies actually worked, but he had never been disciplined enough to stick with them consistently. For 1 week, David committed to meditation every morning, breathing exercises whenever he felt stressed, and mindfulness techniques to keep his thoughts focused and controlled. It was harder than he expected, but gradually his mind became quieter. The random, intrusive thoughts that had plagued him for years began to fade into the background. David felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. His sleep improved, his appetite returned, and he found himself able to concentrate at work better than he had in months. For the first time in his adult life, his mind felt truly calm and organized. But when he met Riley for coffee that Friday, his heart sank. She looked exhausted. The bright energy that had been radiating from her for weeks was completely gone. Her skin looked pale, her eyes seemed dull, and she barely touched her coffee. When David tried to make conversation, her responses were short and distracted. "Are you feeling okay?" David asked, though he already suspected the answer. Riley shook her head slowly. "I've been having a really rough week. The dark thoughts are back, stronger than ever. I keep thinking about how pointless everything feels, how nothing I do matters. I haven't taken any photos in days because I can't see the point. I've been staying in bed until noon and forgetting to eat meals." David felt sick to his stomach. His week of mental peace had been purchased with Riley's suffering. As his unwanted thoughts had quieted down, her depression had returned with a vengeance. The glow he could see around her had faded to almost nothing. Just a faint flicker that seemed to be getting weaker by the minute. "Maybe it's just a bad week," David said weakly, but he knew that wasn't true. Over the weekend, David faced the most difficult decision of his life. He could continue using the coping strategies that made his own mind peaceful and healthy, but that would mean watching Riley sink back into the darkness that had nearly destroyed her. Or he could abandon his own mental health progress and return to the chaotic thought patterns that fed her inner light. It wasn't really a choice at all. On Monday morning, David threw away his meditation apps, canceled the therapy appointment he had scheduled, and deliberately put himself back into the stressful situations that triggered his unwanted thoughts. He went to the busiest coffee shop in town during morning rush hour, stood in the longest grocery store lines he could find, and even attended a crowded city council meeting where he knew nobody. His mind immediately started creating its familiar parade of strange ideas. He imagined the coffee shop customers all turning into different animals, pictured the grocery carts racing each other around the parking lot, and visualized the serious city council members suddenly wearing colorful party hats. The thoughts felt overwhelming after a week of mental quiet, but David welcomed them because he knew what they meant for Riley. When they met that Tuesday evening, Riley was glowing again, not as brightly as before, but enough that David could see her depression lifting. She smiled genuinely for the first time in a week and told him about a beautiful sunset she had photographed that afternoon. "I was starting to think I was going crazy," Riley said. "Last week felt like falling into a black hole, but today I woke up feeling hopeful again. It's the strangest thing." David nodded and tried to smile, but inside he felt torn apart. He was happy that Riley was feeling better, but he couldn't ignore what this meant about their relationship. His mental health and hers seemed to be connected in a way that made it impossible for both of them to be well at the same time. That night, David lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of life he had stumbled into. He loved seeing Riley happy and healthy, but the cost was his own peace of mind. He was trapped in a situation where helping someone else required hurting himself, and he had no idea how to find a balance that would work for both of them. For the first time since discovering Riley's glow, David wondered if their connection was a gift or a curse. For 2 months, David lived in this strange cycle of sacrificing his own peace for Riley's well-being. He would spend his days deliberately triggering his unwanted thoughts, then meet Riley in the evenings to watch her glow with health and happiness. She was taking amazing photographs, making new friends, and even started teaching photography classes at the community center. Her life was blooming in ways she had never imagined possible. But David was slowly falling apart. The constant stress of managing his mental chaos was wearing him down. He lost weight, developed dark circles under his eyes, and started making mistakes at work. His boss called him into the office twice to ask if he needed time off. David's family began calling more often, worried about how tired he sounded on the phone. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning when David received devastating news. Riley had been offered a photography job in another state, 3 hours away. A nature magazine wanted to hire her full-time to document wildlife in national parks. It was her dream job, something she had worked toward for years. "I can't believe it," Riley said, practically bouncing in her chair at the coffee shop. "They saw my photos online and offered me a position starting next month. I'll get to travel, work with professional equipment, and actually make a living doing what I love." David felt his world crashing down around him. "That's amazing," he managed to say, though his voice sounded hollow. "You deserve this opportunity." But inside, David was panicking. If Riley moved away, what would happen to her mental health? Would her depression return without him nearby to feed her inner light with his chaotic thoughts? And what about him? He had built his entire life around helping her stay well. Without that purpose, what was the point of his struggles? "The only thing I'm worried about," Riley continued, "is leaving you. I know it sounds silly, but being around you has changed my life. I'm scared that if we're not close anymore, I'll go back to feeling dark and hopeless." David realized he had to tell her everything. The time for secrets was over. That evening, David asked Riley to meet him at the park where she often took photos. During sunset, as they sat on a bench overlooking the lake, David took a deep breath and began the most difficult conversation of his life. "Riley, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible," he started, "but I need you to listen with an open mind." Over the next hour, David explained everything. He told her about seeing her glow from the very first night at the coffee shop. He described how his unwanted thoughts made her light brighter, how he had tested the connection dozens of times, and how he had been deliberately triggering his mental chaos to keep her depression away. "You're telling me that you can actually see me glowing?" Riley asked, her voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "Like golden light surrounding you," David confirmed. "It gets brighter every time my mind creates one of those random, intrusive thoughts, and when I try to calm my mind using coping strategies, your glow fades and your depression comes back." Riley stared at him for a long moment, processing this information. "So all this time, you've been sacrificing your own mental health to keep me well?" David nodded. "I couldn't stand watching you suffer when I had the power to help, but I'm exhausted." "Riley, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Riley was quiet for several minutes, watching the sunset reflect on the water. Finally, she spoke. "David, this explains so much, not just about feeling better around you, but about something I've noticed in myself over the past few weeks." "What do you mean?" "I've been paying more attention to my moods and energy levels," Riley said, "and I realized something important. Yes, I feel amazing when we're together, but I've also been developing my own coping skills. I've been exercising more, eating better, sleeping on a regular schedule. I've been journaling and practicing gratitude. The energy I get from being around you has given me the strength to build healthy habits." David looked at her with surprise. "You think you might be getting better on your own?" "I think your help gave me the foundation I needed to start healing myself," Riley explained. "Like how a broken bone needs a cast at first, but eventually the bone grows strong enough that the cast can be removed." They decided to test this theory. Instead of David deliberately triggering his chaotic thoughts, he would try to find a middle ground. He wouldn't use intensive coping strategies that completely silenced his mind, but he also wouldn't put himself through unnecessary stress. He would let his thoughts flow naturally, accepting them without fighting them, but also without feeding them. The results surprised both of them. David's natural thought patterns, when he wasn't fighting them or forcing them, created a gentle, steady glow around Riley. Not the blazing light of his deliberately chaotic periods, but a warm, sustainable radiance that seemed to give her just enough energy to maintain her own progress. More importantly, Riley discovered that the healthy habits she had developed were strong enough to support her even when David's glow was dimmer. She still felt the connection between them, but she no longer depended on it completely for her well-being. "I think I understand now," Riley said one evening as they walked through town. "Your thoughts aren't meant to cure my depression. They're meant to give me enough hope and energy to learn how to fight it myself." David felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. "So you think you'll be okay if you move away for the job?" "I think I have to try," Riley said. "This opportunity might not come again, and honestly, I need to know if I can maintain my progress without depending on you. It's not fair to either of us if I can't." They spent Riley's last 2 weeks in town enjoying their friendship without the pressure of David. Feeling responsible for her mental health, they took photographs together, shared meals, and talked about their hopes for the future. David's natural thought patterns continued to create a gentle glow around Riley, but it felt more like a gift between friends than a desperate lifeline. When Riley left for her new job, David felt sad but not devastated. He had learned something incredible about himself. His unwanted thoughts weren't a curse, or even just a way to help others. They were simply part of who he was. And when he accepted them without shame, they became something beautiful. Over the following months, David and Riley stayed in touch through video calls and text messages. Riley's photography career flourished, and while she had occasional difficult days, she had developed the skills to manage her depression independently. David found peace with his own mind, accepting his unusual thought patterns as part of his unique way of experiencing the world. 6 months later, when Riley visited for the holidays, David could still see her gentle glow, but now it seemed to come from within her own strength and confidence, with his presence simply adding an extra sparkle to light that was already shining brightly. David realized that the greatest gift he had given Riley wasn't his chaotic thoughts or the energy they provided. It was showing her that healing was possible, that someone cared enough to sacrifice for her well-being, and that she was worthy of love and support. And Riley had given him something equally precious, the understanding that his differences weren't flaws to be fixed but gifts to be shared.